be a better way.
There must be a better way.
Must be.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to There Must Be a Better Way. This is episode 2. We felt really good about our first episode and we're excited to see where it all goes. And I think we're feeling a little bit less nervous this time around, so should be good fun. Today's episode is all about compliance. We're kind of wanting to reframe compliance as something that supports work as opposed to interrupting it. We're trying to remove the fear from the topic and show how compliance works best when it's built into everyday processes. It's a really big topic and there's a bit of fear around it, so we're trying to kind of reframe that. Shall we start off with the first question, gentlemen?
Go for gold.
Go for it.
All right, well, question number 1 is, what's the biggest misconception people have about compliance, do you think? I'll start with you, Treve.
Good. I'm glad he's here.
Well, I mean, compliance is an interesting topic, really, because if you think about it, there's different types of compliance, right? I mean, you can go as simple as, am I using the right template of a Word document? Or in highly regulated industries, it could be, are we meeting the requirements of ISO or FDA, GMP, something like that. So it's quite a broad topic, I think. And I guess we'll sort of talk generally about it. I'm interested to see what Niall has to say about it as well. I mean, I think in New Zealand, it's very, very important. We have certain regulations. Organisations need to meet these requirements. And when we talk about information management in general, there's the roadblock, right? You know, if staff are not accessing the correct version of the correct document, whether it be a standard operating procedure or even just, as I say, a simple template, compliance is, it's not in the daily work. It becomes a problem and a chore.
I think compliance is an industry on its own, really. I totally agree with you. It's hard for us to do it because we're coming from a particular angle. But if you put yourself in the shoes of any industry, any organization of any size, the amount of headache that we're kind of seeing that they have in terms of stress around forms of compliance is a real issue. And trying to tackle it whilst doing the day job is the challenge. And the amount of compliance that's inevitably coming down the line because of the world, you know, New Zealand, Ireland, everywhere is the same. We live in this world where, are we over-regulated? You know, everything has to be regulated to within an inch of everything. Whereas I suppose in previous reincarnations of industry and generations, it maybe wasn't as prevalent, you know, the requirements to do, you know, you look at building sites even now, right?
Yeah.
Back in the day, my dad was in construction and there was no such thing as hard hats and, you know, just the basics, you know, and that's a form of compliance, hard hats and high vis jackets and steel toe boots. There was no checks on building site. You just walked on, you did your job. And if you survived, you survived, you know.
Stood on a rusty old nail, yeah.
Yeah. But whereas now we have construction clients and the obligations that they have from an insurance point of view, but also as well from a client point of view to be compliant is mind blowing, really. And you kind of wonder how they do it, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, we do quality management. Influence has a wonderful QMS template, and I find it really interesting to demo to quality managers because often they're just doing it in spreadsheets and paper.
Yeah.
You know, this whole idea of have my staff trained on the correct versions of the correct standard operating procedures. And even then, if you think about new staff coming in, you know, we're often talking about new staff, aren't we? And what's their onboarding process like? Well, if you don't have a really good structure around what type of role someone's in and what SOPs they're supposed to train on and satisfying the burden of proof that this person has trained on the correct versions before that incident or accident happened. I mean, it's very, very physically dangerous, but it's also dangerous to an organization around penalties and failed audits and all those sorts of things as well.
The one thing I suppose on our side of the world is that obviously, well, in Ireland, we're part of the EU. There's a lot of bureaucracy and there's a lot of rules and regulations that haven't been there and they come in all the time. So obviously Irish organizations and EU organizations are subject to those types of things. And yes, you talk about the new employees coming in, but I still go back to if I was, you know, running an organization and, you know, you alluded to it at the beginning, Treve, about the forms of compliance. I mean, naming a file the right way is a form of compliance, right? And equally, you know, the quality standards that you need to maintain if you're manufacturing something because it's in, say, pharmaceuticals or it's in something, the other end of the spectrum in terms of compliance. And then there's everything in between. And don't forget as well, a lot of compliance is built on fear. The fear of being fined, the fear of something happening, the fear of being sued, right? And I do have sympathy for organizations who are trying to ensure that this dam is being plugged the whole time. They're trying to find a better way. They're always trying to find a better way, because compliance is a draw on your bottom line. It doesn't contribute profitability. It takes profitability because of the time people need to prove that we have been compliant if something happens, if we get audited,
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. One episode isn't enough really to talk about
Yeah.
compliance, to be totally honest with you, because you mentioned quality. You have then health and safety. You have regulatory, you have legal, you have internal, you have client. These are all forms of compliance. It's massive. It's really, really massive.
Yeah, it's interesting. And, we, in the last episode and every episode, we'll talk a lot about AI. But if you think about AI for compliance, that's really quite a nice use case, isn't it? I've only just kind of considered this now while you were talking. But to be able to use AI to make sure that we are compliant, we're compliant because we have these rules, these business cases, these standard operating procedures. And if you can then go and say, well, take a lending institute, a bank or something like that, and go and saying we've got a client that's applying for a loan. Well, they've given us this pack of documents. A human has to go in and sort of work out, have we got everything we need for our process? Whereas perhaps if we had a really good system with good metadata and context and all that sort of thing, and then we could compare it to an operating procedure or something like that, maybe the machines then start to help us make sure that we are being compliant without the human error aspect of a spreadsheet, for example.
It's a good point. And if you layer in on top of that something like intelligent document processing, when it's AI that's actually analyzing the passport or the driver's license or the loan application and converting it into metadata, I mean, you're really driving efficiency instead of a human kind of doing all of that work, just overseeing it and ensuring, given the human quality checks as you need to give as it moves through the process. It could be like a patient onboarding in a hospital. There's lots of different use cases that you can kind of consider. You're enriching the data with metadata, putting context on it, and doing that in an automated way. The value that creates in terms of time savings is probably unquantifiable. And again, as we said in the last episode, it's probably unbelievable too, if we try to put a value on it. People wouldn't believe that this is how much they're spending to process a loan application or onboard a patient or an employee for that matter.
It's also anti-fraud, isn't it? If you think about, as we both know with IDP, the ability for a product like Abby to look up your master database and compare an invoice number to the approved invoice number in the master database and go and say, well, actually, they don't match. So there's some fraudulent activity happening here. That's another type of compliance, right? Is to make sure that we've got our checks and balances using that tool as well, which is great. There was just a famous example a few years ago of a New Zealand company paying $1 million into the wrong bank account and never seeing it again.
Wow.
Because of some fairly sophisticated fraud on a simple invoice with the wrong bank account number.
Well, I was just going to mention invoicing. I mean, it is a form of compliance. The reason why organizations put PO systems in place is to comply with procurement rules that they have, that if something's over a certain value, you have to get so many quotes, or, that they have visibility in terms of what costs are coming down the line from a cash flow point of view. So the implementation of a PO system on the face of it is very, very good. But it adds a massive layer of manual burden to humans if it's not automated, because you have not only the extraction of the data on the invoices when they do eventually come in, but then matching that to the PO, and you have to do a human match to it. It doubles the time it takes in order to be able to do it. And then trying to push that invoice that isn't correct to the person who actually procured it, because it's another department somewhere else. It's just, I don't know how people do it. Like, they're sending emails and then they're trying to keep track of all those emails that they sent. Is, hey, Treve, is this invoice okay to pay? So you talk about that level of compliance internally in terms of the finance department and obeying procurement rules. If you actually start really scratching the surface of compliance, everything really is compliance in a business. It's all rules. It's all regulations. They all need to be adhered to. There's very little oversight, and it's a minefield for organizations to try and ensure that compliance is adhered to and met. And generally, it's an afterthought.
It's interesting because you were saying it's not a money maker. It doesn't add to the bottom line, but actually it does in the way that it avoids mistakes. It avoids client audit. So we were talking to a company that was looking for a system because they failed a client audit. So if that client then is looking at multiple providers and out of 3 providers, one company did not fail the audit, well, that could be worth an incredible amount of money for that client. So it's all of that. It's fines, incidents and accidents and WorkSafe and issues and things like that. And over here we have a thing called a PCBU, which is a person conducting an undertaking or business. And if someone gets hurt, so their role, they actually have to be part of health and safety in the workplace. So if someone gets hurt, they personally get fined and can be quite a lot of money. And it's that whole idea of the CEO or the business owner sitting at the top and doesn't care about health and safety. That's a no-no over here. They need to be involved in it.
You are right. Again, I refer back to some construction companies that we work with, where we help them with health and safety. I mean, the terminologies are kind of different in the world because of the way, the EU thing and whatever else beyond that. But they have things called, I don't know if you call it good saves or near misses, and they have to log it. So a good save is there's a nail on the floor and they pick it up and they log that, because actually when they're going for the next tender for a job, they're able to prove that they're really good at good saves. They're really, good at logging their near misses. So their health and safety record is very, very important in their ability to get the next job. And it forms part of the KPIs that they need to be able to prove, as well as other KPIs, obviously, in a tender. So yeah, it's definitely another episode for sure. You could delve down into quality. I mean, we do a lot of work with companies that manufacture things, and quality is a big issue. And the quality systems that maybe they've used, from what we've seen, they seem to be quite proficient at certain things. But where they fall down is the actual documentation relating to the quality process. There's a disconnect between the actual document and the process itself. Exactly. So it means that there's a lot of manual interventions with spreadsheets and hoping that they're using the correct version of the document when they're going out to service, say, a very important laboratory piece of equipment that needs to be precisely calibrated because it's producing medicines that people are going to take. It's very serious, in terms of, so you might talk about fines. There's also potentially, well, maybe I'm being dramatic about life and death, but in certain scenarios. So the quality side of things is an episode on itself. The health and safety is an episode on themselves. And then, everything else is probably an episode on itself, but we'll try and squeeze as much as we can into a summary version today, without going too long and not into tomorrow and the next day.
Yeah. I mean, I think when we go back to a little bit what we said before as well, there must be a better way, right? The staff is saying, I want to do a good job, but everything's siloed. I've got information in the spreadsheet over here. I've maybe got a system somewhere. I've got documents and folders. Everything's siloed. So their compliance tasks, if you like, are not centralized and auditable and traceable. Often they don't have a deadline put on them, right? Certain things need to happen within a certain time. You might have a client that needs to get a product, like you say, onto a boat to ship overseas by a certain time. And if you think about all of the people involved in that process, I mean, it starts at HR, right? Where you go and say, well, have we hired enough people to meet this shipment? Some people are sick. Some people just didn't turn up. Some people were going to turn up on Monday, but then decided they didn't want to, and they're not going to start, and all that sort of thing. And then that goes into the sort of production line, or the people that are buying the product that goes into the final thing, and you can go right through to the machine maintenance, like who's maintaining the machines so that they are ready for that order. There might be, usually we've got 8 machines, but 5 of them are down at the moment, or 2 are coming up for maintenance. And the maintenance people didn't know about the big order that the salespeople have just signed off on. So you've got all of these things. The whole company is just trying to get this product out, but no one's talking to each other. There's no system going and saying this is coming in. And obviously there's an ERP system, but that's not dealing with often, humans and what's actually happening. Then you might have a separate machine maintenance system or an asset management system, and that's not talking to the, it's that compliance sort of thing of communication as well.
And then you get your shipping invoice and your bills of lading that you need to process as well, as long as with that shipment and all the other documentation that comes along with that. And say you're shipping into another territory that has another form of compliance in terms of being able to adhere and prove that these goods are product worthy. And if you actually break it down and the journey of compliance based on whatever industry you're in, whether you're making a product and shipping a product or you're providing a service, it really, really is something that needs to be considered correctly for organizations and holistically, rather than just, here's a compliance system that's going to help us with this form of compliance. What about the 15 or 20 other forms of compliance that you need to adhere to? And this is actually the thing that we're kind of seeing. This compliance software that's tackling a particular form of compliance is cropping up. And I go back to the fear. So if I'm an organization and this company approaches me to do a demo of, say, a system that tackles a form of compliance, I don't know, whatever, it doesn't really matter. It looks really good. The dashboard looks nice. It's really pretty, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's hard not to be attracted to that. It's really hard not to be attracted to that and to say, hey, that's going to solve this. But it's not solving all of your compliance requirements. I always look at it from a user adoption point of view. Say you bring in 3 forms of software, depending on the size of your organization, to try and be compliant. And one could be a spreadsheet, for example. You have to teach all of those users how to use those kind of things. And I always go back to, I know they don't fly in your territory, but do you know Ryanair? Presume you heard of Ryanair. So the low cost European airline. And Ryanair is very interesting, their model. So obviously they on the face of it, they're low cost, but they're actually highly efficient as well. Incredibly efficient. And one of their key cornerstones is that they only buy the same aircraft, right? Okay. So they only buy the same aircraft because then their pilots are familiar. The training requirements are a lot less. So they're not buying Airbus and Boeing. They're just buying, I think it's Boeing. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But they're only buying one form. And the whole logic behind that is that it's really easy for people to use. They're familiar with it, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a really important form of efficiency that they impose on their business. And if you think about multiple systems and people having to learn how to use multiple systems, just that itself in an organization is definitely not the way forward for organizations. Definitely not.
Well, I like the word holistic that you used just before. If you actually look at compliance more as a function of the business rather than a piece of software or a team of people, they make sure that the rest of the organization is compliant. If you actually go and sort of say, well, we want to design our information management, because that's really what it is, right? It's information management. And not just documents and emails, it's data and it's object data coming from other systems and all that sort of thing. But if you design your business in such a way that everyone's accessing the correct version of the correct information all the time, that's compliant, right? There's not mistakes going on there. It's not like even the salesperson couldn't find the right template, so just did a cut and paste or a file save as of a proposal and sent it out with the wrong company name in the footer, for example. How often do you see that? So I love the holistic approach, because that's really how we like to engage with clients, right? Sort of go and say, well, actually, let's do an information architecture and let's talk about where is data coming from. You've got these 5 systems over here. Well, we're not saying that mFiles should replace those 5 systems. Probably could replace 2, but that idea of saying, but the other 3, let's connect mFiles to those systems and bring that data in, and then let's have a single source of truth, because that whole idea of a single source of truth when it comes to compliance is so important.
It's the design, really, isn't it? Because every organization is different. They all have different compliance requirements. I mean, we haven't even talked about ISO and things like that, but you're absolutely right. And, whilst I was mentioning about like multiple systems not being the way, some of them have really good functionality, especially around their mobility, around their apps and phones and stuff. And that's the way a lot of compliance and data is gathered. So if you take the construction site, someone's out on site and they can't go to a laptop straight away. They need to be able to log something straight away on their phone. So you're right, marrying the best of what someone has created, an external third party, but the value really is in the data that they're collating, not how it's collated. So what, it's a nice app and it's a nice dashboard and that's so great. That's just the gateway in. That's just your ramp in. Then on the back end is really where the intelligence, that structure, that context, you mentioned AI, the context of that data and how it drives the process. So say, for example, you might have an importance category 1 to 10, 1 being not important and 10 being really important. And we need to report this all the way up the food chain.
Yeah.
To have basic automation so that if someone is logging something that's 9 or a 10, it has to go this route. Or if it's a 1, it just needs to be recorded rather than it doesn't need to be actioned. So it's what data and information that's been gathered and what happens with that. And then I suppose once you have that structure, and we mentioned structure a lot in our last episode, once you have that structure right in terms of how it needs to be presented, I mean, then you've got the possibilities, which you've got your dynamic dashboard. So you can actually see the data in real time. You don't need to put it into a spreadsheet and then run a report at the end of a month that's kind of already old by the time you run it. You need that, the dynamism that comes because things happen very, very quickly in certain industries. So you need to be able to see at a single time where certain things are. And, that's compliance, but it's also intelligence. It's also business intelligence. So it's actually straddling two sides that are really important to the business. Yes, that if someone came in and audited you, if you needed to be audited, here's our dashboards, here's our feed of information, it's coming in live, but also seeing, hang on a second, we've got a bit of a problem here in our business because the data that's being collected identifies maybe something that's going wrong in a quality process or in a health and safety process or any other process for that matter as well. So there's multiple benefits to getting that input correct of the information, how it's collected.
Well, also making it trusted. It's got to be trusted data, right?
100%.
So, where's it coming from? Like that report, was that the correct version of that report? Was the information in that report correct based on other documents? And then permissions, making sure that the right people have access to the content. That's another form as well of compliance, right? Is making sure that your information is permissioned properly, which is a massive problem in most organizations. It's interesting to see some of the messaging coming from Microsoft at the moment around what mFiles is bringing to the stack. A lot of it's around compliance and permissions and filling some of the gaps that have traditionally been a problem with any folder-based system, SharePoint or anything,
Yeah.
Did we answer the question, Kenzie? I can't remember what it was.
I can't remember what the question was either.
The question was what's the biggest misconception people have about compliance? And I think that there were a few kind of misconceptions that were thrown out there. For example, the fact that it's not a cost add, it costs the organization money. But, we spoke a little bit about that and how being compliant can save you money or win you clients and all that kind of thing. So it can be a value add. We spoke about the kinds of systems and ways that people are managing compliance. It doesn't have to just be managed by a certain team in a certain spreadsheet. You can bring compliance into everything that you're doing, and it can just become a part of that kind of everyday business as usual business processes. Yeah. So I think there are a few misconceptions. Whether or not you answered which one was the biggest.
I'm going to say that my contribution in terms of the multiple system misconception is probably the most valuable one. That's 1-0. One Ireland 1, New Zealand 0. Okay. Okay, we won't go down that route. But yeah, I think the biggest misconception is, I suppose, and we will see it time and time again, is unfortunately the organizations believing that their decision to procure multiple health and safety compliance systems will solve their problem, but actually it'll make it worse.
Yeah, I think there's a head in the sand aspect to it as well, that sometimes they just go and say, look, we've always done this and it's been okay and we'll just keep sort of going. I mean, sometimes when we go through the sales process, and I might have mentioned this last time, but you go through the sales process and then you get into the discovery process. And when you start discovery, you're just like, I wouldn't be kind to my clients here, but it was a little bit more messy than maybe we were led to believe, sort of thing. And you kind of go and say, well, why did it take so long to buy mFiles? Why didn't you just buy it straight away after seeing one demo when it could sort of solve all those problems for you? But I think there is is it a too hard basket? Is compliance sometimes a too hard basket, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And that leads a little bit into the next question, which is, would you say that organizations only care about compliance when an audit is looming? Because maybe there's in that kind of too hard basket. It's something where, oh no, we're about to be audited, we'd better sort out a compliance thing. Or, oh no, we've just been audited and we failed, so we'd better sort out a compliance tool. Or, I'm
going to jump in because actually there was a word I wrote down and it's the word reactive. Again, I go back to the EU because we live in this bureaucratic environment. I was going to say something else, but I'll say environment. Go back to GDPR. Okay, it was something that came in, and oh my God, it was the world. If my employees, if they ask for their data, I'm not able to provide the last 5 years or 6 years or whatever the rule was. I can't even remember now. I'm going to be fined, and they're going to sue me, and all this kind of stuff. And I have a disgruntled employee who's left, and so GDPR was this big thing, and we got companies contacting us, and they were more worried about the fines that came with GDPR than actually protecting the data. That actually, if you think about what GDPR is, it's about data protection, and it's about personal data protection as opposed to other company data protection. So it was probably one of those regulations that actually did make sense because obviously the EU were ahead, knew that if this data gets out, there could be a lot of fraud. So then you had GDPR, and then you have other forms of compliance. And actually there was one very recently I can't remember what the name of this directive, where companies have to be able to report on all of their waste. So much of it is recycled, so much of it isn't. And, when I send out that package on the ship, plastic packaging that goes around, we need to be able to weigh that, and it's all weighed, and they have to be able to report this at the end of the month. And it's all very reactive. Guys, we've got this data over here relating to this shipment and this, and it's all in disparate systems. And if they don't be able to prove it, then they're fined again. So it is always reactive. And guess what? Tomorrow or next week or next year, there's going to be another form of compliance. And you know what? In a few years, there's going to be another form of compliance. So it's always very reactive. Okay. And the fear is, I suppose, that yes, we will be fined and we'll be audited, going back to the original questions. And that's really the ultimate penalty that an organization will have. Oh my God, we've been fined 100 grand or whatever it might be.
Well, GDPR's terrible penalties, isn't it?
Yeah, but I've never heard of anyone being fined, to be totally honest with you. It's certainly never been reported. I'm not saying it's not policed. I'm just saying that it didn't turn out to be the really, business changing regulation that organizations thought it was, but they still should be GDPR compliant. It's kind of waned in. So is the audit the motivation? Is that was the question? I would definitely say absolutely yes. In terms of regulatory compliance, in terms of client requirements, it's different again, because, they don't want to lose their contract. If a client is asking them to do a certain thing to a certain standard, whatever it might be that you do, if they can't prove that to a client, they might lose the contract. So that's the ultimate financial penalty that they might have. And there's reputational damage with that as well, especially in the industry that they might work in. There are other forms. I mean, if you look at, again, building, so BIM is a big 3D modeling and stuff like that. So you have a very convoluted naming convention on each of those files. It comes from the British standard that they do it. And it's really, really convoluted. And the way it's set up is that the name builds as it goes through the process. So it adds a certain whatever it is, numbers or dates or whatever it is, and it's all abbreviated. And then suddenly you can have this really convoluted, long-winded naming convention that's supposed to X marks the spot. You know exactly where it is and where it stands in the standard. So yes, the audit, but I think that it's more than that. There's a lot more to it than just that audit that might have. Go back to the Ryanair example. They're saving money by having standardization in terms of being able to train their pilots on one set of controls, right?
Yeah, it's saving time.
Yeah, same time, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that saves time by doing that. And that naming convention, don't you love it when you can automate that with metadata?
Totally.
In workflow, and it just automatically updates the name as it goes through. It's so much fun. But yeah, I think the saving time thing is interesting, actually, when you think about it, because we talked last time about saving time with search. But if you're saving time by just having good processes in place, that means that I don't have to look up at that wall chart and go, what do I call it now, and get it wrong and all that sort of thing. Just it's all automated for me. It's just yet another 5-minute savings on one document per day sort of thing. And another one is retention and disposal. Archives New Zealand has a very laid out standard for retention and disposal. It's document class. It's got to be disposed of and destroyed within this time frame. And you have to keep a report that the document existed. Now, in a folder-based world, that's impossible. Like, there's an open secret. I think I'm okay saying this. There's an open secret between Archives New Zealand and most government agencies that virtually none of them are achieving the standards because they can't. It's just too hard. If staff are going and putting documents in random folders and Teams channels, how do you apply retention disposal rules to them in a folder-based world? So with M-Files, we can do that. It's all automated because in M-Files, the document has a class and it has metadata and it has a created date and last modified date, and we can automate with workflow. The documents will be destroyed as part of workflow, so human in the loop. And then a report is generated and kept that the document did exist, and this was the reason that it was destroyed and who made the decision. We call it automating the impossible. It just works. Staff don't have to do anything. You don't need a document controller running around and looking and going, oh, should I move this document into this folder so that our retention happens, That's another form of compliance.
Yeah. And we use M-Files a lot for those types of processes. But in GDPR, yes, you do dispose of the personal data if someone leaves an organization. But say they're qualified they had a pension. There's some data that needs to be kept because they have a pension. You need to be able to. So there's a nuance. It's very complicated that, you're keeping certain classification of information, but you're disposing of others as well. So if you imagine a human trying to do that, say, well, let's keep all of this pension information, But what is the pension information? And as I'm sure you can appreciate, there's lots and lots of different types of documents that relate to someone's pension. There's annual statements, there's changes in maybe the governorship of who's managing the pension. It could be a different pension provider. So you have to retain all of that. But I think what's interesting, Treve, you mentioned, and I think if you want to get to the nub of any form of compliance, it's all process. It's all process. We have this cornerstone, one of our I always get slightly embarrassed when you mention like marketeers speak, but actually when we came up with trying to describe the 4 things that what we do, one of them is what we call compliance by design.
Nice.
Okay. That's what we call it. And essentially what that means is once we understand your compliance requirements, irrespective of what type of that is, whether it's health, all the forms that we've talked about, whether they be regulatory, internal, client, etc. Once we understand what you're subjected to in terms of compliance, we will incorporate them into your process, both in terms of how the information needs to flow, what information needs to be captured, what documentation relates to that document, and again, the whole document management side of that. So if the version of that document changes, you don't have to re-engineer the entire process. You just swap out, you update the version. We call it compliance by design. And we do probably no different than yourselves. And you try and understand the organization's requirements and you incorporate them in. And the benefit for that, the real win for that is you don't have that fear of that audit. You're operating. It's not an afterthought. You're not saying, oh, I need to generate that report to be compliant, or I need to send that information. You're just operating in a compliant way. No one has to think about it.
That's a great term.
And if you do that, then you never have to worry if you're being compliant or not. You just are compliant, and you have all those audit trails. You have the version history. You have the history of the workflow, whatever process, et cetera, et cetera. You can see all the steps, who approved, who didn't approve, who did what, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all of these compliance requirements can be baked in to how your information should or shouldn't flow. And that's really how we believe organizations should adopt their strategy first, that they want to be compliant by design, and then look to a tool that's going to deliver on that. And, we would obviously say M-Files is a cornerstone in terms of the information management side of that things. But yeah, as you said it earlier, there's nothing wrong with dovetailing that with maybe a point solution that's connected to M-Files that actually does something in a much better way, or is much more designed for a particular industry, maybe pharmaceuticals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As long as it's connected, it can't be on its own. It can't be an island. It has to be connected.
Yeah, it's getting rid of silos, right? And that's what we keep talking about. And it's something I'll always talk about the rest of my life. I'll talk about breaking down silos and a central point of truth and all of that sort of thing. But becoming even, like, as we say, more and more important because of AI. Because if you're giving trusted data to AI, it's going to make the compliance issue just so much easier. And also this whole idea that's coming out with M-Files of structured data being included in the large language models. All of a sudden, you're going to be able to have your objects coming from maybe some other systems all in one sort of model and be able to ask questions in general. Are we compliant on this process? Are we compliant on this shipment? Are we compliant on this building, on this phase or this milestone of this project? Are we compliant? Just by asking the system. And if you've got trusted data, whether it's documents and emails, but also structured data objects coming from your other systems, I mean, it's just gold. And once again, it's going to save a lot of time. It's going to save a lot of pain, and it's going to save a lot of money.
So we're saying process, trusted data and information, a single source of truth, and automation that drives the information through as well will give you what we call compliance by design, and the ability for AI to be able to use AI to interrogate that information. If you're a senior director and you want to find out in your space, are we ISO, whatever compliant? But you're right, because that's really where this is going, if it's not already there. But that's where compliance is going, where AI is going to tell you whether you are or whether you aren't. And you don't want them saying that you are when you actually aren't, because you've got bad data feeding it.
When the data's poor, the machine lies.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a very interesting one. Another one is when you get into agentic AI, when you have, as part of workflow, go out and do this and come back and go out and get this answer and come back and decide whether I can move in this direction or that direction. That's very much not far away in M-Files as well, which is exciting. Future-proofing
is the key, as well, because it's an industry. As I said at the very, very beginning, it's an industry. It's a money maker for governments. It's a money maker for other organizations to be compliant, and another layer of burden on an organization to ensure that they meet those particular requirements. One of the things that we always really like when we're talking to organizations about M-Files is that okay, yes, we can look at really improving your processes that you have now. But again, going back to, but what about the ones that are around the corner that we don't even know about? Can it be adapted? Can it be configured? Can it be molded to solve those particular issues? And the answer is always yes. Even though we don't know what they are. We were in one organization. They said, well, how do you know? You don't even know what requirements are coming around the corner. And when we kind of broke it down, we say, well, look, compliance is about information and it's about process. If you're capturing the right information and it is correct and it's driving a particular process in your organization, then you will always be compliant. So if you've got a tool, a platform that's able to do that, then you will always be able to automate the next form of compliance that comes down the line. And hey, you might want to put your own internal forms of compliance that you've always wanted to do in terms of your own internal standards, but haven't been able to do because it's just another 10 spreadsheets that someone has to manage. And they're providing you with out-of-date reporting that you can't trust anyway. So, it's great to be confident, and I'm not saying arrogant, but like confident to know that when there's something else around the corner, that platform that you have that you're already using maybe for 10 or 15 other processes, might be even not compliant related process, HR, finance, whatever it might be, can be adapted to solve this next manual threat you have to your business, if that makes sense. And that's always great to be able to say that.
It is, and I think it's even like you say with internal ones, it might be something as simple as the proposal's over $50,000, so it needs to be peer reviewed before it goes to the client. I mean, that's such a simple workflow for us, right? But I was going to ask you, have you ever asked a client about an external audit process? Have you ever sort of had that conversation where you say, well, what actually happens when you do get audited? Because it's quite a serious business and it's very time consuming and it's very expensive.
Never asked them, because I suppose what we would tend to focus on is how do we make those audits better in terms of that compliance by design piece. But we certainly have been told that they can't commit to, say, one of our projects might have to be paused because coincidentally they might have been, an audit might have propped up and they said, look, we're not going to be around for the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Just what I was going to say.
We're not going to be around for the next 2 or 3 weeks because we've just got an audit. And it's like, so everything has to be dropped. The business literally stops.
Yeah.
Because we have auditors coming in. And that has been said to us, like countless times. And if you actually think about that, think of the disruption to business.
The cost is incredible. And the audit took 3 weeks instead of 2 weeks because we couldn't provide them the documents that they were looking for and proof of who approved them and things like that,
If you think about the better way, going back to what this podcast is all about, it's a better way. Really, and it's not even utopia, because utopia suggests that it's not possible, okay? Where you give the auditor a guest login to M-Files with permissions and let them find the information that they want themselves. Obviously, the permissions are really important because you don't want them snooping around other company information that's not relevant to the audit. But if you can give the auditor a guest login and say and it's a very quick overview around how M-Files works because it's very user-friendly, you can find whatever you need here yourself to satisfy yourself whether we're compliant or not. Or we'll have 2 or 3 people who are being pulled from their day jobs, getting those folders or showing you where you need to be able to find this information. Find it yourself.
Yeah, but if you want to see who approved it, just right-click and go show history and see the approval process, time and date stamp.
Yeah.
Because imagine that we've got all these documents. Yeah, okay, we've found the documents in the boxes. We've managed to provide them, or we've printed them out for you. The reams of paper we've just printed to give you all the information. And then they go and say, well, who approved these? There was some emails. This $1 million order, who approved that? Oh, there's an email for that. Okay, well, I need the email. Ooh, right, where's that then,
Yeah.
Whereas in M-Files, it's just all completely standardized and linked and streamlined. It's just so lovely. So I agree with you. I was going to say exactly the same thing, by the way. We've been in a sales process where they've said, we can't talk to you for 3 weeks because we're being audited. I'm like, what is that process? This one actually was people coming from overseas, from Europe, to audit a New Zealand company. And they do it every year and it takes weeks. And I think they've got to pay the cost of the whole thing.
They're not getting it for free, for sure. If you actually just think about it, it's probably the biggest pinch point.
We're underselling it.
Yeah, we probably are. No, genuinely, it's probably the biggest pinch point and opportunity an organization has to improve efficiency is look at all of their compliance processes, be as efficient as they possibly can with those. And the layers and layers and layers of manual intervention and what's M-Files call it now, operational friction is gone, gone, literally gone. And again, putting a value on that is just unbelievable. It's like an unbelievable value to put on that. We would be laughed out.
Part of the problem for us is that we take it for granted. It's like we were saying with search last time. We just take it for granted that people can do a search and find the correct version of the correct document instantly. We're used to that. And compliance being built in and streamlined with workflow and metadata, I mean, we're just used to it. So I think we are underselling it. I think we go in and we talk about it almost a bit sort of off the, well, obviously compliance is built in, but it's just so important.
Do you like the new direction M-Files are going with the pre-configured, quality modules?
Well, we've been selling M-Files QMS for over a decade. It is a pre-configured quality management vault. So yes, absolutely, I do. I think with some of the other ones, I'm curious. That tax advisory one, I think is quite interesting. I've sort of been doing a bit of research on that. Some of the other ones that come out, I mean, I'll go in with an open mind, and see what maybe some prospects and customers think of them. But certainly quality management has been a big part of what we do here.
I like the ability that organizations can take the pre-configured module, but also run the more standard M-Files instances, that's configured specifically to the way that they operate. I like the fact that they can do both. And that, again, familiarity, user adoption, user acceptance is so much easier to deploy and roll out. And, your hypercare is less, your training requirements are less, your support is less, because you have that familiarity across the organization. And again, go back to the Ryanair thing. It's so important to have as much standardization as you possibly can have. This less systems, not more, less spreadsheets, just those basic rules and those basic, I suppose, rules. We're talking about rules, we're talking about compliance. But I mean, the biggest form of rule that an organization should have when they're looking at improving process is that it should be less systems, not more. That's what I would always say. And I know that's kind of forthright. Not having a department come to me and go, well, I want this system because it's going to improve this. I mean, again, this holistic view, this more corporate view, okay, well, let's do a full analysis of this. Let's see, okay, it might solve this and it might solve this particular process, but what does it do downstream or upstream? Does it affect anybody else?
Yeah.
And inevitably it does. Inevitably it does, because the information needs to flow across departmental organizations. So as soon as I start seeing organizations changing their mindset to break down the barriers, that it's not the HR department and the finance department, it's the organization, right? And that they look at how that information needs to be able to traverse through departments based on the process, follow the information where it needs to go. Don't have those roadblocks. Don't let departments implement roadblocks because they're looking after their own patch to say, oh, we want to buy this health and safety system because it looks really, really good and it's going to do this, this, and this, and it's going to avoid these spreadsheets. Great. Okay. Let's really review this. Or maybe, what we say to our clients is look, before you go and actually buy it, bring us in and we'll talk to you. We'll say, look, yeah, it's really good at this, this, and this, but have you thought about this? And most organizations don't think about the other effects. And then what happens is, and I'm sure you of course have seen this, because you've purchased it, you become protective over it and you want to keep it, even though it's inhibiting business growth. You've made the decision to procure whatever health and safety system or a quality system or whatever it might be. And because you've done it, you will do your damnedest to make it work within the organization, even though it's probably not the right strategy that you should have adopted. And you should actually just take it out and then just kind of go again, Well,
that's the SharePoint thing as well, isn't it? Whether it's a system, whether it's that free SharePoint we get with our M365 licenses, it's the defense of it that defies logic. It's that really interesting thing of we had our network folders and it was creating content chaos. So then we did, SharePoint, I don't know, 2010 or something like that. And we moved everything in there and it was chaotic. And then, SharePoint Online, great, let's move everything in there. And it was chaotic, but we thought we were modernizing because we were going to the cloud. It's that whole definition of an insanity, isn't it? It's doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Well, do you want to know an interesting story actually on that? And it's totally coincidence. Was over the last few weeks, about maybe a year or so ago, we were in large Irish international, they're Irish based, but they're international electrical engineering company. And they approached us and it was their health and safety department had approached us, which is quite a significant department in construction. Anything health and safety is quite significant, as we know. And they approached us and said, look, we're kind of struggling with some of our processes. So they built their processes, health and safety processes, using SharePoint. And it was probably the best looking instance of SharePoint I've actually ever seen, to be totally honest with you. The front end looked amazing, really, really, really good, but it didn't work in the back end. They never thought about the back end. They just thought about, the ingestion of the information. This is what we're saying, the input, and the input was really good. So they managed to get that input down, but it didn't go anywhere. It didn't do anything. It wasn't driving a process. It wasn't collating the information. It wasn't related to the correct documentation. So there was multiple fundamental issues with how they had gone about doing this. So we had a conversation about a year and a half ago, and it kind of didn't really go anywhere, because the problem was that they had invested so much in SharePoint, time and money, that I suppose there was probably people's heads on the block that had it been outed, that it actually hadn't solved the problems. So it wasn't that we couldn't solve what they need. We knew exactly what they needed, but there was a kind of politics at play. So about a month ago, I got an email from the company and a new person that's been brought in to head up the digital transformation. She asked if I'd have a quick call with her, just a kind of an intro call, 5-10 minutes. It turned into like an hour call on the phone, which is kind of unusual. Normally, these things are a little bit more formal, but it was just a call. And she asked me straight out, what do you think the problem was? And I explained to her what the problem was. She goes, that's exactly what I thought. So we'll talk, further. So the point is going back to your point in a kind of a long-winded way. Here's a practical example where SharePoint is great for what it's designed for, but when it straddles into, by Microsoft's own admission, when it straddles into areas that it wasn't designed for and is tried to be used for, it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And this was just, for us, it was like a eureka. Oh my God. Yeah. M-Files will sit in at the back end of it, work really, really well in tandem. And it won't actually take a lot for them to get a really, really, really good solution. They've kind of done a lot of the heavy lifting already. It's just this is the magic piece of the jigsaw that once we plug this in, provided they do it, I'd be crazy if they didn't, but they put this magic piece of the jigsaw in, it's just going to put it on steroids, their whole solution on steroids. And it's, again, just going back to your talk about SharePoint, it was just coincidental that this has all happened in the last few weeks, And again, just a new person coming in with less of a bias, no agenda, just looking at things kind of coldly, go, okay, what way she do. She was reaching out to all the vendors that were originally reached out to. Yeah. So she likes M-Files. She really likes M-Files. She sees how it's going to work with their current SharePoint. And again, it's not about throwing SharePoint out. It's about improving it,
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So is there one more question?
I think it's kind of already been answered.
Yeah.
It was answered quite early on, which was, is compliance really just the compliance team's job, or does everyone in the business play a role? But I think that when we come back to what Niall was saying earlier about compliance by design, I think that if you build it into the everyday processes, then it does become everyone's job, because it's just a part of what they're doing every day, and every action that they do meets compliance rules, and suddenly everyone is in charge of being compliant, and an auditor can come in and just get a login into M-Files and see all of the information that they need to see in order to be able to say, yes, this business is compliant. So I think that third question really has already been answered.
By design. We answered it by design. We were compliant by design as well today.
Yes.
Well, I'll just add one little bit to it. Because M-Files is a metadata system, and in the past it's really relied on humans to add the correct metadata to drive the processes, right? So if people were lazy and they just put a document in and call it an unclassified document and add very little metadata, you're not going to drive those compliance-related processes by doing that. But now with the AI, with I know metadata, with the ability to automatically add metadata to documents when you're adding them, or as a service in the background across thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of documents, all of a sudden that changes our conversations as well, because we're not asking the humans to do anything really. We're just saying, look, put the document in M-Files, and the rest is automated. And I think that's another thing we're sort of taking for granted a little bit. That's a reason to buy M-Files by itself, right? It's just humans don't really have to do anything. We'll design it so that it's going to automate your compliance for you.
There's a couple of interesting webinars coming up by M-Files in the next few weeks. One in particular is about literally M-Files and Copilot working together and showing how that works, and how this context enriched information assists with Copilot successes, really. And people really should, not because we're saying it, and of course that sounds easy for me to say, but really the proof of the pudding is always in the eating, and you need to see how these things work. We could talk about it from days on end, and obviously it's clear people now whoever have listened to the second episode and the first episode will know that as long as there's oxygen in Treve and my lungs, we'll talk about it. But you need to see it. It is really one of those things that you need to see. And one of the things I would strongly recommend people to do is that if they get an email in their inbox and it shows it like an M-Files webinar, just sign up for it. Even if you can't attend, you're going to get a recording, because really that's the compelling bit, is showing it. I don't know if you would agree, Treve, but that paints the picture to me. In today's world, it's important to try and get people to realize that actually, I know documents in their world can be just an afterthought, an irritant, something that's, just part, but it's, 60% of business processes require documents, right? I mean, that's mammoth. It's a mammoth part of business. And I know it's not the sexiest part of business, a document, but it's so critical to the lifeblood of business to get all your document management correct. And especially now, as we enter the AI age, it's even more prevalent, because if you don't have those basics right, you're never going to be able to fully implement the likes of Copilot or whatever AI tool that you wish to implement. So, I mean, I know and next episodes we'll talk about it a lot, but organizations really need to actually get the head up as opposed to down from the business, really get a steering group together, really get proper conversations, get vendors in, get us in, get DocSmart in to talk about M-Files, and judge for yourself what it is that we're talking about, because this really is an opportunity to get it right. And those that get it right will boost their performance and get that competitive advantage. Of that, there's no doubt in my mind.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you to everyone who listened to episode number 2. I hope that you found this one just as riveting as the first episode, and that you will continue to tune in to the coming episodes. The next one is going to have a special guest from a company in America. So stay tuned to find out a little bit more about that. But yeah, thanks for listening, and we will see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, guys.